I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
All right, folks, welcome to yet another edition of the Corporation Nation radio program. I am Clint Richardson, your host. With me today for a return visit is Mr. Gary Long, who was on the show last Friday, and we're going to continue our discussion from both Friday and Monday today. And we'll take calls in the second hour. Have you heard about, before we get into that, have you heard about H.R. 347? Which takes away the right of free speech in certain areas. There's a lot of hype about this bill. Of course, the the truth is that for over 40 years, there's been this clause where the Secret Service can arrest you for your free speech. Basically has to do with entering buildings without license and everything else. There's a lot of hype about this, but I did want to mention, when we're considering bills like H.R. 347, you have to consider what the word, again, please understand that all of these words that we throw around and take for granted, and we throw all this patriotic fervor to, do not mean what we think they mean. In the legal realm, these words do not mean what we think they mean. When we are talking about the fact that the Constitution states that the freedom of speech shall not be inhibited, do you remember what that word actually means? Look it up, folks. Look up the legal definition of freedom. Once again, that simply means, freedom means that you shall not disobey the law. So if you have freedom of speech, that means you can speak all you want as long as you're not breaking the law. If your speech, or your quote-unquote free speech, is against the law of government, the law of man, then guess what? You can get in trouble for that, and it's perfectly constitutional, it's perfectly legal for them to throw you in jail for saying something you're not supposed to say, or holding up a sign, or whatever, because you only have, as a citizen, freedom of speech. You do not have a right, as a citizen, for free speech. You need a permit for that a lot of the time. Only men who claim natural rights, again, under God and nature, under the natural law, have the right to say anything that they will. Citizens do not. This is a very, very important point to understand when you're considering all of this legislation that seems unconstitutional, if you will. It's actually not. Because remember, the Constitution is just the character of the laws that are to be set for government. So when we say freedom of speech, we literally mean you have the right, the political right, to say whatever you want as long as it's not against what government's rules say. So when you're using the word freedom and you're throwing it out there casually, you better remember what that word means. All right. Gary Long is with us today. He was with us last Friday. We're having a very interesting discussion ongoing about the concept of religion, specifically Christianity, as opposed to all of the other religions out there. Just Christianity without the the corporation of it. Gary, welcome back.
Hello, Clint. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. Sorry that we were supposed to have you Wednesday, but that old character Walter Buren, he's pretty hard to get. So I moved you to Friday. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, not at all. I think that was a great show. Walter is fascinating to listen to, and of course, I know he's one of your major mentors, and you carry his message so well. It's just one can never get tired of listening.
Yeah, and it's funny because he was the first. He was one of the first interviews I ever heard back in the day, before I knew a lot of what I know years ago. He was one of the first interviews I heard, and I listened to what he was saying. I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta look at this. And of course, when I quit my illustrious Hollywood career, he was the first person I called because he seemed to be not getting the support he needed, and I guess the rest is history. We made that movie together, and then I started making my own. So, so today I wanted to focus specifically on this concept of pledging. Pledging being an ancient term, an ancient act, which really signifies if you will, the contractual enslavement of people. When we pledge something, we are literally putting ourselves in the position of a commodity being pledged for something. So let's what have you take it from there, Gare.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. You constantly challenge me, so I had to spend a little bit of time sorting through the term pledge, and then some of the connections that we see in everyday life related to that. And it's very enlightening. Like you pointed out earlier, it is a promise to something or someone to give over as security, either for repayment or promised faith, so forth. Well, what was fascinating to me as I went through Black's was that it does not necessarily have to be a tangible item. So that actually clued me up a bit when we talk about things like the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sure.
Of course, allegiance is yet another interesting word. So I appreciate the fact that you brought up this topic, because it allowed me to dig into those words, and of course that's how I learn more, and how everyone else out there listening can certainly gain some degree of enlightenment anyway.
Yeah, well, I took the liberty of pulling up a few definitions and things out of our own law, just to get us in the mood for what this whole thing means with pledging. And I want to read you so we can get started, so we can understand what's happening here. There's two things that I really want to get out there so people understand the nature of this country, how it was formed. Again, a corporation. Okay, Article 12 of the Articles of Confederation. It stated that all bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, and debts contracted by or under the authority of Congress before the assembling of the United States in pursuance of the present Confederation shall be deemed and considered as a charge against the United States for payment and satisfaction whereof the said United States, now listen to this, folks, and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. Okay, shall be deemed and considered as a charge against the United States for payment and satisfaction whereof the said United States and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. Now, the question you might have is, what does that mean, public faith? Faith is such a religious word, isn't it? Well, it turns out it's actually a financial term, and we'll get to that one.
of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here. This is your world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas.
So, the Articles of Confederation pledged you, as the public, where it states, and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged for the debts charged against the United States. So what is the word faith? Now, we all think of faith as, well, I believe in something. And that's sort of what it means in the legal language, but really, faith is defined in Black's Law First Edition as confidence, credit, or reliance. Credit. Did you hear that, folks? So credit requires collateral. What do you think the public faith is? An act may be said to be done on the faith of certain representations, belief, credence, or trust. Now, a trust is another financial instrument, not the kind of trust where I make a promise to you and you just trust me. No, we're talking about a financial instrument here. Thus, the Constitution provides that the full faith and credit shall be given to the judgments of each state in the courts of the others. A solemn pledge or an oath to make faith is to swear with the right hand uplifted that one will declare the truth. Now, keep in mind that when the Pledge of Allegiance first came out, kids were required to lift their hand up in the air, communist style, palm forward, and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And the laws on the books and in the court's opinions stated that if you did not pledge allegiance as a child, that you would be suspended from school, and your parents might even be fined and go to jail. This was how, well, communist the Pledge of Allegiance actually first started. And it was actually written by a man named Bellamy that was a socialist, a very well-known socialist, actually. So it's a very interesting history about the Pledge of Allegiance. Again, hard to put into words, but we are actually pledged as credit for the good faith and credit of the United States. It's a very strange thing. So, Gary, what is this thing? What is pledging? What the heck is it?
Well, before we go that far, if I can play your straight man for a moment here, some questions that jumped into my mind and maybe into some of the listeners' minds as well. So what's happened here is that another party has pledged faith, or if you will, liability, from one party to another. Well, exactly how did this happen? How could it happen? What's the legality? Is that through our own consent? And the other question that jumps up, the faith and liability to whom? How would you approach that?
Well, the Constitution is very clear, and this is why I say, look, wake up, folks. If you make a contract or a compact, like the Constitution, and in, I believe, Article 6, I don't have it in front of me, it states very clearly that the debts that the United States owes to Britain and France are to be transferred over into this United States corporation that was being created, the District of Columbia. If you make a contract in debt, then you're certainly not independent. You're in debt. So, this was basically that part of the Constitution was basically the same thing, just taking this part of the Articles of Confederation and moving it over. Because again, the Articles were very clear that all bills of credit and monies borrowed and debts shall still be, of course, on the United States, and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged to pay that debt. So obviously it's not a pledge to the people, it's not a pledge to themselves, it's a pledge to the people who own the money, the people who wanted the war, for England and France, the crown. Let me read you something else here. This is Black's Fourth Dictionary definition of pledge. A bailment of personal property as security for a debt or other obligation. The specific article delivered to the creditor in security is also called a pledge or pawn. This article in the Articles of Confederation literally were a pledge to something else. So, I mean, that would be my best answer.
Okay. And another definition of the 6th edition is a pledge is a security interest in a chattel or in an intangible represented by an indispensable instrument such as a formal written evidence of an interest in an intangible, so representing the intangible that the enjoyment, transfer, or enforcement of the intangible depends upon possession of the instrument. That's a mouthful, but
right.
When you talk about intangibles, what might that entail?
Well, again, reading from the same definition, I didn't read the whole thing. It actually refers to a pledge in this, what we're talking about as a chattel mortgage. Mm-hmm. So it says the legal title passes to the mortgagee subject to a defeasance. And when you consider, of course, the bankruptcy of the United States, that the Congress is there to, according to Jim Trafficant anyway, the Congress is in session to oversee the bankruptcy proceedings of the United States, you start to think, hey, we are chattel and we are mortgaged for the good faith and credit of the United States.
Right. And going back to the original long string of questions, Lysander Spooner, I'm sure many of the listeners are familiar with him. He challenged very eloquently how one person can bind another. Under what conditions can someone bind another? And I guess, to me, this kind of goes to the heart of the question: by what authority do representatives bind the people to a contractual obligation such as a pledge?
Well,
how does that happen?
You're talking about the Constitution of No Authority, right?
Correct.
Yeah. This is, I've heard some wonderful people out there talk about, getting rid of what we've got and creating a voluntary society, with the key word being voluntary. And I keep saying, well, wait a minute, folks. It's a really great idea. The problem is we are already in a voluntary society. And basically the answer to that question, in my humble opinion, is that if you accept the benefits of government, you have to accept the binding of government. You have to accept the artificial person, and you have to be a surety to that artificial person. In other words, you're responsible for your little corporation that you carry around with you, this artificial construct, or in government's opinion, you are chattel, and this is what essentially why you are bound, simply because you voluntarily accept all the benefits. And I could go over countless court cases that say, basically dismiss the defendant when he tries to argue the Constitution. He says, look, it's very simple. You accepted the benefits, therefore you must accept the rights that come along with it. It's your right to be forced to do this and this and this and this. It's your right to be pledged. It's your right to be bound. That's the problem. It's voluntary.
Yeah, and that's exactly the direction I wanted to go with that. But we have a break coming, I think.
Yes, they come too quick, don't they? All right. Well, we'll get back into this after the break.
Was successfully completed. Reality.
He's a rebel and a runner. He's a signal turning green. He's a restless young romantic, wants to run the big machine.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Corporation Nation. Again, with us is Gary Long. Today we're discussing how basically all Americans, or at least all citizens, are actually considered by government to be a pledge, or to be pledged as, well, chattel, collateral, for the good faith and credit of the United States. I want to read, it's the name of an ancient writ in English law, and it's called the Writ de Pledges Acquietandis. Okay, the word pledge and the word quiet are in there as in quiet title. It says, the name of an ancient writ in the English law, which lies where a man becomes pledge or surety for another to pay a certain sum of money at a certain day, and after the day, if the debtor does not pay the debt, the surety be compelled to pay. In other words, the man is the surety. If he does not pay the debt, he shall have this writ to compel the debtor to pay the same. So, again, there's that word pledge, and when we look at Bouvier's Law Dictionary, I believe this says a pledge is defined as a bailment of goods by a debtor to his creditor to be kept till the debt is discharged, a contract by which a debtor gives his creditor a thing to detain as security for his debt. Well, that's describing, unfortunately, folks, your citizen, your artificial person, your straw man. Okay, that is what is being pledged with you as the surety, the thing that is attached. So if your person, your legal construct, does not stand in good standing with government as far as being a good little debtor, then as surety, the government comes after you in order to try and collect whatever debt that is. So basically, when we're talking about being pledged, we're really talking about this artificial doppelganger that we carry around with us. It's our contractual person, basically. And the good way to understand what that is just to consider your credit report. Okay, your credit report has nothing to do with you. It only has to do with your artificial person. All the contracts, all the things that you get into, all your banks, everything else. This is why I don't care anymore about my credit score. I put my finger up to the credit companies because it's not me. It's completely artificial. It has nothing to do with me. I could be the best person in the world, and my credit score can tell me or tell someone that I am the most horrible person in the world. My person can get stolen. For God's sake, my person can get stolen. My person can be being used right now in Guadalajara or across the country or the world in China. And I cannot know it's being used. This is my artificial person. That is what my, this is what identity theft is. It's the stealing of your artificial person. It's the stealing of your good faith and credit. All right, so, Gary, there you go. I mean, let's get more into this, deeper into the biblical aspects of this and how long this has been going on, seemingly forever.
It would appear to have gone on for a very long time. The mechanisms of which have probably evolved over history. Clearly, kings originally, if you go as far back as we can read or understand, kings were given the authority over land and, of course, all the occupants and resources and so forth within. And they said to have derived this authority from the gods, or God, if you will. So the king, and going back to what we talked about the last time, Christ's vicar on earth, if you will, assumed this authority over all the little people, and apparently has evolved into at least a presumed authority to, as used the term contract, which I think is very important, contract with others and pledge the assets of that kingdom or land or whatever. Now, when we talk contract law, though, and for the listeners again, if there's not full disclosure in a contract, is that contract binding? Or are we expected and required to understand the law, therefore ignorance of the law is not an excuse? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, the whole ignorance of the law is no excuse argument doesn't seem to apply to the lawmakers. That's the interesting part about it. Mm-hmm. When we tear apart the word contract as well, I mean, con can mean a lot of different things. To swindle, for instance, but it's also negation. Negation of something. It is a negative, in other words. So, contract, I'm trying to figure out what exactly the etymology of a contract is, but when we put con in front of words, then we really got to start thinking about all these con words: constitution, contract, confederation, con this, con that. If I were to guess at this point, I would say that a contract, being that the word con means negation, literally means negation of rights. In other words, you're contracting outside of the legal aspect of government, and you're doing a personal contract. But if you're contracting with government, are you negating your natural rights? I got to look at tract. I'll have to figure out what that word is.
Well, contract looks like early 14th century, from Old French, a contract or agreement, or to draw together, metaphorically, to make a bargain, those sorts of things. See tract. Okay, let's take a look. Tract. It's from Latin tractus, tract, course, space, duration, a drawing or pulling, a drawing out or pulling, to pull, draw, to draw, drag, or move. The meaning stretch of land or water is first recorded in 1550s. So,
well, it means agreement, and it means it's a hard one it's a hard one to tear apart. Mm-hmm. But it seems to limit everything else. So if you're in contract, you're losing everything else outside of that contract, which in this term would be natural law.
This may make a little more sense. In another definition, a tract refers to a little book or a treatise. That's from the 12th century. A handling, treatise, treatment. So it would, I guess this is stretching perhaps, but something contrary to an original writing, perhaps. Would that make more sense?
Oh, say that again?
Something contrary to an original writing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get at is that if you're contracted as a citizen to government, then all of your rights from government are contrary to anything else you might claim, and that's it's hard to put into words, but yeah, that's what we're talking about. And then there's the words obligor and obligee. An obligor, which would be us, is a person who binds himself to another by contract. But the problem is a person is an artificial thing. So it's an artificial thing binding an artificial thing to another artificial thing. And then the obligee is the person to whom another is bound. So government being the obligee. It's some of these things are, when you start thinking about it that way, it's kind of scary, really.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. If we could step back to the pledge again, don't mean to keep jumping around, but
it's hard not to.
Yeah, it is hard not to, because all this seems to tie together. One of the meanings I've come across, it's an allegiance vow, allegiance vow, attested by drinking with another. So that's somewhat akin to a toast with a more solemn promise involved there. So that takes us back to the allegiance and the Pledge of Allegiance that you very effectively covered earlier with the writers, the original writer and so forth.
Right. All right, Gary, we'll be right back. You're on the Corporation Nation. Stay with us.
Science is simply battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in this form of energy. And then it explodes into this enormous collage.
Okay, folks, welcome back. Here in the Corporation Nation. All right, so Gary, let me just read one more thing. There's so many definitions of pledge. Pledge also means pawn, interestingly. Judge Story, this is from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, he says Judge Story defines pawn or pledge to be a bailment of personal property as security for some debt or engagement. The term pledge or pawn is confined to personal property, and where real or personal property is transferred by a conveyance of the title. Now, title can also be name. As a security, it is commonly denominated a mortgage. A mortgage of goods is in the common law distinguishable from a mere pawn. But a grant or conveyance of goods, engage or mortgage, the whole legal title passes conditionally to the mortgagee. It goes on and on and on. So the mortgagee obviously is government, and we like to blame the banks as the bad guy when it comes to mortgages, but banks are really just middlemen for government. All of the things that banks can do are because government allows banks to be a pusher, if you will, of Federal Reserve notes, allows banks to create Federal Reserve notes out of thin air, if you will, again, based on the pledge and faith of the public. So it seems to me, Gary, that government goes out of its way to get us to create a title or a name, to create a false corporate structure of everything we own. We have arms, which government wants us to register instead of arms as firearms. We have our homes, which, it wants to be property. All of these things are then registered. Our children, they can't just be our natural, little guys and girls. They have to be children or child, and that has to be registered. We have ourselves that we register. Our parents do it for us, actually, with the certificate or title of birth. I mean, it seems like everything that we have is in the form of a title or some sort of mortgage, with the government being the mortgagee.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And which brings us back to that allegiance word. And I think this is pretty powerful. Allegiance stemming from 14th century, the loyalty of a liege man to his lord. In a general figurative sense, is a recognition of claims to respect or duty. That's pretty powerful. And when we look at blacks with regard to allegiance, it's an obligation of fidelity and obedience to government in consideration for protection that government gives. And in English law, that kind of allegiance, which is due from all men born within the king's dominions immediately upon their birth, which is intrinsic and perpetual and cannot be divested by any act of their own. When you put those two things together, that is pretty scary.
Right, and then you take each of those words and you start breaking them down. They all seem to mean the same thing. Fidelity, for instance, means faithfulness or adherence, faithful or true faith. We discovered what faith means, that it's really a financial instrument, and has very much to do with fealty, which is loyalty, fidelity, faithfulness, same thing, loyal and faithful, faith. Okay, these terms, it's like they pretend to be just everyday common language that we use. You know, we have faith in God, we have this. It turns out these words are all legal terms, and they mean something very specific, which is to get you into this artificial loyalty. It's not a voluntary necessarily or personal feeling. It's a contract.
Yes. One which apparently people are compelled to agree with. Or at least the elements of government come down hard if you don't. So where does that leave, I guess, what you describe as a free man? Where does that leave?
Well, it supports my personal opinion that the only way out of this is to completely separate yourself from any and all contracts. And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of people say, what's the solution? What are we going to do? What's the solution? Add you, again, a word that is completely misunderstood because we're using it conversationally. But with government, there is only one solution, and that's the legal definition of solution. And guess what? The word solution means ending or satisfying a contract. So what's the solution to this enslavement that we voluntarily put ourselves in? Well, the solution is the definition of solution, which is the end of the contractual nature. I mean, now, you know, in answer to that, is that the final solution? Is that the only way you can be free? Well, no, because, you know, if enough people do that, same thing that happened in the Civil War is going to happen today. The government is going to use its military force to force people to accept its will, and the War of Northern Aggression. That's why they called it that. When the southern states found out that the bankruptcy was, the 70-year bankruptcy was coming up, guess what? You know, northern states, the original 13 states, said, well, we need you, southern states, to pledge all of your land and property as the good faith and credit to reinstill the bankruptcy, to fund or bail, I don't know what the right word is there, remortgage the good faith and credit of the United States. The southern state says, heck no. We don't want to be in a contract with the crown to pay the debt of the United States. No. And that's where the war came.
Right. And that's where Lysander Spooner really, I thought, effectively approached all that. At least he put it out in detail for people to consider, for sure.
All right, go ahead.
I was just going to say, wanted to make this transition here because pledges did go through a transition, and this goes back to the corporate nature of things. Much of the law of pledges has been replaced by the provisions for secured transactions in Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code.
Aha.
So you can see it's just an evolution of, or I guess one could look at it more as a refinement over the years, locking in the system just a little bit tighter.
Well, I think you can see it as an incorporation. In other words, it's going from just a blood oath to literally to a contractual corporate nature. Everything is turning into one big giant corporate structure. Whereas before, you know, they didn't have the written records of people. They couldn't take your birth certificate, your title, and pledge it for something. It had to be an even more voluntary thing. And of course, there's always the threat of violence. There's always force and coercion, which government is famous for. So,
Yeah, what was interesting about the Civil War, from what I can put together, is we always look at the fact that the South seceded, but was forced by the government to reintegrate as essentially a different party, and we can talk more about that.
You mean a different in fact, the states actually had to accept the new constitutions, and before they could even accept the new constitutions, they had to accept what were called the Enabling Acts, which basically pledged all of the lands of each state or each territory to the federal government. So they had to accept the new constitutions in the state to even become part of the states. Of course, it wasn't a choice. They didn't have a choice. They had to accept the new state constitutions. So, again, that aspect of force. All right, folks, we'll be back, and we'll take some calls in the second hour here. Stay with us.
Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back to the Corporation Nation. I'm Clint Richardson, and with me is Gary Long today. Gary, let's continue, and then we'll take some calls with the Civil War and how this applies to it. And also, you mentioned the Uniform Commercial Code and how this applies to that. So let's get back to that.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to expand just a little bit more on the Civil War, because I think that was a huge event beyond the obvious. I mean, we had looked at the formation of the United States. You had Federalists and you had Anti-Federalists. Not all the founders were of the same mind in this regard. So there was, over the years, there was this constant struggle between the two. And it seemed to have come to a head at the time of the Civil War. Now, there was this continuing attempt, and this is my interpretation of all things, but there was this continuous attempt to bring the colonies into one coherent unit, and both legally and actually. So not only that during the Civil War were the southern states compelled by force of government to realign themselves with the federal, a lot of people might want to consider the fact that the northern states also were included in that. The northern states were compelled. And if there's any question of that, you can just look at the draft riots in New York, where the federal government actually killed people who were trying to resist the whole northern draft action. So then we see all that happen, and at the end, the southern states at least had to redo their constitutions, had to rewrite everything effectively. And at the same time, you saw, or not too long afterwards, you saw the 14th Amendment come out. That for the first time, in actual legal written, you saw the concept of a United States citizen. Very, very little comment before that to an American citizenship can be found. So we see the statutory creation of not only a citizen of a state or a colony, but a citizen of the larger United States federal.
Well, it was always considered more of a blood right, as in a natural born right, as opposed to anything else. And the 14th Amendment, you're right, we discussed this yesterday. Basically, the whole purpose of it seemed to be to take away the powers of the states in a more permanent way and make everybody citizens of the United States that are citizens of the states. In other words, take everybody out of the republics and put them into the corporation.
And yeah, and that more firmly aggregates the liabilities and responsibilities of these citizens, and as you mentioned earlier, gets moved over into a complete commercial construct under Uniform Commercial Code.
Now, Uniform Commercial Code is one of those sort of the types of acts that are passed in each state uniformly. So they meet in their little private associations and they construct these things, in this case a bunch of lawyers, attorneys, and then bring them back to each state, and each state passes them individually. And so you basically have a central law that, instead of being passed centrally, is passed by each 50 states. It's a very tricky thing, and there's over 16 or 18 different uniform acts that, spread everything from this one, the UCC, to Child Protective Services, to all these things. This is how they infiltrate into the states without actually pretending or without actually showing that it's a federal effort, it's a central effort. So how does this apply, this pledging thing? How do you think it applies to that UCC, what is it, Chapter 9 or Article 9?
Article 9. It just essentially has refined the terminology, as used converted the term pledge into more of a contractual structure, and with very, very detailed parameters of that. So it's turned it into actually an easier way, because in Article 9 it talks about banks and talks about contracts, of course, and you can see where this is just, like I say, it's just a focusing, it's a refinement that makes things more easily handled legally through the court systems, and basically draws the whole structure, the whole three divisional structure of the federal government into one common force.
Into one private commercial venture, basically. And that's why, we had a caller last night, I believe, that we had to cut off because it was the end of the show, and I was trying to say that, I fell for the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC1, the UCC3, all these forms, and until I realized, wait a minute, first of all, it has the word commercial in it, so that can't be good, and then it has the word, excuse me, and then it has the word code in it, and I'm like, wait a minute, they're selling this, these gurus out there selling this Uniform Commercial Code thing as a way to basically put all of your own personal property into a commercial trust, and pretending that that's somehow free of government, even though it's within the UCC. It's a Uniform Commercial Code thing, and I looked up the word code, by the way, and it's a legislation. It signifies in general a collection of laws. It is a name given by way of eminence to a collection of such laws made by the legislature. Eminence. You know what eminence? Eminence is simply defined as a title of honor for which the United States is not supposed to have, a title of honor given to cardinals. Cardinals, of course, are the highest dignitaries of the court of Rome, or in this case, we're talking about ecclesiastical law, which our law is basically derived from, and in my opinion is still based on and still exists within. And then we know the word eminent from what? Eminent domain? Well, what does the word domain mean? It means dominion. It means that the government has the right to dispose at its pleasure of what belongs to it. So if you have eminence and you have dominion or domain, dominion is defined as the right of the owner or thing to use or dispose of it as at its pleasure. If eminent domain exists in this country, that means, folks, you don't own anything. There is no private property. There is nothing. So to put something into what we call a commercial code does nothing to make it natural. And that's, I think, is the point that I have to go and retract some of my own writings. Anything else you want to cover? We're actually going to go to a break, and then we'll definitely take a call first thing.
Just want to make an observation that in fact takes us full circle back to the right of kings.
Yes. The vicar, the replacement of God on earth. All right, folks, we'll be right back, and looks like our first caller is Art. So stay on the line, Art. We'll be back.
Is this real, or is this just rhyme? The world is like a ride. You think it's real, it's just a rhyme. We can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice between fear and love.
All right, folks, welcome back.
The world is like a ride.
And you're in the Corporation Nation, and today with me is Gary Long. Let's go ahead and take some calls, Gare. We have Art with, Art is anonymous today. We don't know where Art is. Art, are you there?
Good evening, Clint. It's so nice to be able to listen to you regularly without having to wait and hope you're going to come on someone else's broadcast so we can hear what you've got to say.
I appreciate it, man.
I got introduced to you, I guess, probably about 3 years ago when you came on Deanna Spingola's show.
I make the disclaimer that I was an idiot then, and I know a lot more now.
Well, you impressed me then with your first Corporation Nation video, and I've followed your work ever since. You and oh goodness, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. Anyway,
good old Walter.
Yeah, Walter Buer. And so I've been following you guys for a few years now, and I'm always impressed with what you do.
Thanks,
but you mentioned two words here, pledge and contract. And these two are actually cousins. Now, having studied law myself back in the early 1980s, I learned the importance of being able to understand words, definitions, their origins, all of this, if you're going to have an intelligent conversation. Now, personally, I have in my library 15 dictionaries alone. That's Black's 1st through the 9th, Bouvier's 2nd, 6th, and 12th, Ballantyne's 3rd, as well as Oxford's 5th and Webster's 2nd, as well as Blackstone's complete 4-book commentary, including the commentaries on the common laws of England. So let
me ask you a personal question then, and get your the best opinion. Now, the reason I like to go to Bouvier's of 1856 first is because it was accepted. It was actually commissioned by Congress, and it's supposed to be the most honest, including, defining eugenics and stuff like that. The reason I go to that, it's my first go-to dictionary, is because I think it's honest. It's more accurate. It actually defines the terms better because it defines them in the terms of the thought of the day when the Constitution was created. Am I wrong there?
No, actually, I would agree with that. The Bouvier's 1856, that would be Bouvier's 6th edition.
Yes.
And it is very easy to read, very easy to understand. But you'll find whether you're reading Black's, Bouvier's, or Ballantyne's, regardless of what edition you read, there really isn't going to be any difference in the definitions. For example, blacks first. Okay? Now, blacks first was 1891. And the way it defines pledge, and we'll take these words one at a time, pledge and then contract. Pledge is a deposit of personal property by way of security for the performance of another act. The specific article delivered to the creditor in security is also called a pledge or a pawn. Now, this coincides and goes and supports what Beauvier says. Now, if you go to Ballantine III, which is 1968, a bailment of personal property as security for a debt or obligation redeemable upon terms and with the implied power of sale on default, the Roman name applicable to a contract of pledge or pawn was pignus or vadium. The difference between a pignus and a hypothecation, sorry, I have a speech impediment, consists in this: in the former, the possession of the thing pledged passed to the pledgee; in the latter, it did not. Now, all of this supports what you cited from Beauvier's 1856, the 6th edition. So it becomes pretty clear what a pledge is.
Yeah, and we're really talking about, when we're talking about legal dictionaries, also it's important to say that we're really talking about the opinion of the court. We're talking about case law usually more than anything else.
Right, exactly. Now, on the issue of contract, really there is no difference between a pledge and a contract other than the way they are approached. A pledge is something that's just verbal between two parties or between several parties. It can be verbal. A contract can be verbal, but really cannot be enforced through law unless it's actually in writing. So let's look at the word contract. Now, there are 6 definitions. If you break it down to 2 words, con and tract, there are 6 definitions for con, 4 of which, 1 being a noun, 1 being an adjective, and 2 being a verb, do not apply in the content in which the word contract is being used. But the first 2, which are nouns, definition 1, negation, which is roughly 1570s, short for lac contra, meaning also against. And the second one, also a noun, early 15th century, from Old English kunen, to know or know how, also to study. So there's con. Now, if we go to the word tract, tract is late 15th century, generally referring to an area, but also a period or lapse of time, from the Latin word tractus, meaning track, T-R-A-C-K, course, space, or duration. Duration is a time period. And that is also that is a noun. And then, of course, the second definition of tract, also a noun, little book, treatise, mid-12th century, probably a shortened form of Latin tractus, a handling treatise, treatment from tractar to handle. So there's con and tract. Now, if we go to the actual word contract, where we put the 2 of them together, this takes us to late 14th century. Now, this means to make narrow or draw together. Early 15th century, to make an agreement. Also from Middle French contractere, not contractor, contractere, from Latin contractus, past principle of contract her, or to draw together, combine, make agreement. Also, second definition, the first one being a verb, second being a noun. Early 14th century, from Old French contract, modern French contract, from Latin contractus, a contract or agreement, from past participle of contrahere, or to draw together, metaphorically, to make a bargain together.
Bargain's another interesting word, because that would have to be separated. Bar and gain.
Right.
I mean, all of these words just floor me.
This is where understanding of law and having all of these dictionaries come really handy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, again, if it's a negation of something, oh boy, it's hard to wrap my mind around that, actually.
And of course, there is the U.S. underworld sense of arrangement to kill someone, first recorded in 1940.
What was that?
Another part of that also on the contract is the U.S., and it's amazing how this is actually included in the definition of contract, U.S. underworld sense of arrangement to kill someone, which was first recorded in 40.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, that helps better understand the definition of these two words.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate your call. Thank you. Gary, did you have anything to add to that?
No, not at all. Excellent call.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a learning process for sure.
Certainly is. All right. Well, Art, anything else you wanted to add, or?
No, just thought I'd help to define those words because it did seem like you were having a little bit of difficulty with.
Well, again, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. I'm coming out of my own enslavement trying to understand all this, so I do really appreciate it. We'll be back with, looks like John in Canada. Stay with us, folks.
Your life through ideological hegemony. But if you think you need guns to stop tyranny, then what you waiting for? We've already stripped you of your liberty, privacy, civil rights, and dignity. You want some more? Derivatives, quantitative easing, trade imbalances, recession, low GDP, nations close to collapsing, and subprime loans, foreclosed homes, and people's taxes spent to bail out too big to fail AAA banks again. Fear levels rising as the US crash seems imminent, having smashed the debt ceiling of 14 trillion despite protests and clashes in Athens streets. The IMF imposed structurally unjust programs.
All right, folks. Welcome back. The more I look at definitions of words, they're all separated into criminal law, government, contracts, etc. But the ones that come from the feudal system, that ancient system where, pledging was certainly a part of, I'm starting to understand that we are basically in an advanced form of clandestine feudalism. Let me read you the definition of the word fealty, which we discussed earlier. Fealty is basically fidelity or allegiance. It says, under the feudal system, every owner of lands held them of some superior lord. Well, guess what, folks? That describes you, because your land is titled. You're in an agreement. From whom, from the lord, or from whose ancestors the tenant had received them. So it was passed on by blood, basically. But by this connection, the Lord became bound to protect the tenant in the enjoyment of the land granted to him, and on the other hand, the tenant was bound to be faithful to his Lord and defend him against all enemies. Does that not sound like what we have in the United States to a T? We are bound to the United States to be faithful to it and to basically protect it from all of its extracurricular activities where it's nation building and doing all these horrible things. We're required to support it. And in return, we are allowed to enjoy our property, even though we don't actually own it. We're just tenants. Is that not the feudal system, and is that not the same thing as the United States? My goodness, what dreamland have we been in all of this time? Let's take John from Canada. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, I think you got the name wrong. This is Dallas.
Well, Dallas,
okay,
welcome to the
problem.
show.
Hey, yes, the feudal system is alive and kicking, and it didn't work the first round, and our ancestors came over to this west to escape them, and they followed us over here, so we were born into it, and our parents basically gave us away at birth by signing that birth certificate. So you mentioned earlier people ask you for a solution. If you want to break that word down to solve or solvent or dissolve the final contract or the contract, but if we could do that, everybody would go to court and do it, but you mentioned they won't let us without putting up a fight and the military style, kill us.
Yeah, and that's that's part of the natural right to defend your rights. Unfortunately, people think that the Second Amendment is what gives them the right to carry guns, and yet the whole purpose of it was to defend your own rights.
Yeah, they don't want us doing that, because if people realized how we are voluntarily giving up our God-given rights, then of course nobody would want to do it. So I think, well, the solution, I don't know, Hitler called it the final solution. If they want to use force against us, then they push people into a wall where we have to force back, and that's where that final solution comes into play.
Well, that final solution was to transfer the Jews to Palestine. Basically, that's what the final solution actually really signified. And who's running the country through private associations and dual Israeli citizens in the country? Well, it had nothing to do with killing. It had to do with creating a new state. So, and of course he was in that agreement, that transfer agreement with the National Socialists, with the World Zionist Congress. So, I don't know what to say about the final solution, but I go back to saying that this is a fight of individual minds. This is an awakening of the mind, and that cannot happen in a hive situation. It can only happen individually, and so that's why I'm here, because I'm in the process of that awakening myself, and hopefully can lead others through my fumbling to the same place. Gary, do you want to chime in on that?
No, I just want to thank Dallas for those great observations. And what this really does, at least for me, is to show why history repeats itself, because there are little remedies. There are few remedies other than what Dallas was describing.
Unfortunately,
I just wanted to ask a question as well. Before the South was asked to give their properties and everything for collateral for the bankruptcy, we do need some sort of a law and order. How did it work before it turned into this commercial type of style? We have government protection that comes along with the government contract. So how do we get rid of the contract but still afford our government protection? How do we do that?
Well, we don't. We don't have protection if we're not a member of the corporation. This is the thing that's so hard for people, and why most people say, well, I don't want to follow that path. I want to be a slave so that I can get my benefits. I want my Social Security. I paid into it.
I guess what I'm saying is, if we're in a society where we are responsible citizens, we are free, we're allowed to protect ourselves and carry a sidearm for the protection, just as a symbol more than anything. But all the people involved with that movement, we have to come to some sort of a contract between us so that we all agree and we all have an understanding, right? So how do we come up with a contract that is outside of the commercial feudal system?
It's funny because, one of my goals in life is to actually start a community somewhere in this in this land. Well, yeah, there's a lot of places out there that have their own. I mean, there's literally, from what I understand, hundreds of communities that have their own currency. They're so small that they're not a threat to the government monopoly, so that the government doesn't necessarily worry about it. And of course, it doesn't want to make a big deal out of it, because then people would realize that you can have other currencies besides the dollar. So, I mean, my goal, I think, with this show, even if I can manage to not screw up and get kicked off of this network, is to ultimately to find enough people who have skills and who want to live free, as free as you can, and protect that freedom to the death, literally, then, that's kind of what I'm looking for eventually, is to start something like that, with a bunch of people who really truly wish to be out of debt and not be a surety or a fealty. I mean, what else can you do? Because one of the things that me and Bert have talked about continuously over the years is that this cannot be done by an individual alone. We cannot just simply become free men. Who's going to protect us? Who's going to protect, and how do we protect each other? That's the point. So while it's an individual, it's a personal journey. You can't do it alone, and that's the trick. How do you organize without taking a oath to an organization? In other words, just becoming part of another trust or part of another thing. And that's kind of what I'm trying to square out myself, is how do we do this? And the best thing that I've found so far is, honestly, through the church being not a building, not a thing. It's not a tangible thing. It's actually more of an agreement between men to be Christian, basically. And when I say Christian, I mean literally follow the teachings of Christ under natural law, to live under natural law. And the thing about that is that you can form these different corporations that are non-statutory from the church. They're actually immune from statutory law, which is why the politicians do it, and the Pope does it, and the Queen does it. Corporation
my uncle tried to do that years ago, too. He hasn't been bothered by the tax man for his whole life, so...
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's taking upon yourself the responsibility, and that's all it is. Because again, under the feudal system, you are attaching yourself to government, giving it allegiance, and doing whatever it asks you, and in return, it's giving you these benefits. Well, I don't want that. I don't need it. I can be responsible for my own actions, my own land, and I can be a caretaker of nature, not a rapist of it, like government. So, that's my opinion.
Clint, could I jump in?
Likewise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got some links I want to send you to some groups that are doing exactly what you're saying, and we will...
that would be great. You can get my contact information. My contact information's on my blog, which is realityblogger.wordpress.com. And thanks for calling, man. We'll be back. Thank you, Yoda, very much. All right, folks, we're back. Last segment of the Corporation Nation. Gary, did you say you wanted to chime in on that last call?
Just for Dallas. Something that jumped right in my face as he was making inquiries about, where do we go with this? With natural law, you're looking at self-accountability, self-reliance, and voluntary associations. But this type of system is not without precedent, so I would encourage him to study the Iroquois Confederation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that laid out a framework for just the sort of that may address the questions that he has.
Well, and it's important to say again. I don't, we're talking about wearing a gun on our hip, but I'm saying, look, that the purpose of guns. Purpose of arms, whatever they be, they don't just have to be guns. The purpose of arms is to protect these natural rights. Government's purpose is to supersede and, kill nature and natural rights. So those guns, those arms, are there to protect your clan. I kind of like the word clan. It's not just a political for show thing. This is the real deal. I mean, that's what those guns are for. It's not just for appearances. Anyway, let's, you got to realize that you're going to have to eventually defend your community, your land, your setup, whatever that's going to be. And if you don't have people that are willing to do that, geez, you pretty much out of luck. Let's take Lauren from Ohio. Lauren, are you on the line?
Yes, I sure am. Hey, listen, you guys are like to the end, so I've got your solution. It's a declaration of dependence on God Almighty. I'll read it real quick. But here's the thing. Government. It's mental, govern, to rule, mental. It's mind control. I got a word for you to look up. Verisimilitude. It's the appearance of truth. It's being substituted for what, we're supposed to be living. If you want a guidebook, look at the Bible. It tells us how to live. All law is either declaration or contract. Now, they've been using contracts to rule you, and I love how you guys have been analyzing all this. But the bottom line is, you don't need to be swimming around in the minutia of their nonsense.
Yeah.
You make your statement of fact. Here we go. Declaration of dependence on God Almighty. Let it be known that I, and you put in your name, born, you put the date, in city and state, and then united, I have little u, and then states of America, comma, to the father's full name and your mother's full name. I'm a child of the Creator God, a man created in His image, a citizen of His heavenly kingdom, and a slave of Jesus Christ. New paragraph, God is the grantor of life. I am the grantee of life. I have a covenant with the living God. I am subject to His rule alone, and to Him I swear all allegiance. My life is my ministry. I am God's gift to me. My name, in any variation, image, fingerprints, retina scans, blood, DNA, and all of my fleshly being are my personal property and may not be used for commercial purposes without my written consent and compensation for use. New paragraph. Freedom is the right to be responsible for yourself. Freedom under God is my birthright. I hereby rescind my signature on any and all documents perceived to contract away any of my God-given rights or to usurp the legitimate authority of God to direct my footsteps. I am not the fiduciary for any person. New paragraph. The Declaration of Independence states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain un-a-lean-able rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The Constitution is a body of negative rules that limit the power of government workers and define what the federal government shall do. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States of America, and the Bill of Rights do not tell a free man how they shall live, but they do protect each man's right under God to be free. So let it be with me, a free inhabitant of the land. And you signed this, blank day of month and in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
And
now,
you get
Lauren,
a signature, and you file it in your recorder's office, and with the Secretary of State, if you want to get a passport, this is what it is to be a non-citizen national. This is what it is to be a free man under God.
Is that posted anywhere?
No, I just wrote it. I'm gonna file it. I've just, I handle each of these. Well, here, let me just explain something to you, because I live this life. I've had CPS bothering me about my children. No, go away, get out of here. I give no consent. My children aren't wards of the state. I have no contract with you. Same thing with, you don't have to have insurance to drive. You don't have to, you don't have to do all, my children are homeschooled. I don't ask people permission to raise my children in truth. My life is my property. It's mine. And the whole point is what they're engaged in is private law. All you have to do is ask them and notify them of your position. The Alfred Addis Utopia Silver case should show you that legally they don't have any power to move once you notify them of who you are in truth. The problem that I see with all these cases is everybody wants to keep being a U.S. citizen, and you want to keep having your rights, and you're not understanding what the game is. Now, you guys are analyzing it properly and understand what the game is, but the solution is to act. The only way that you can save yourself is to yield to the truth. Wedge yourself to the truth. God really did make you. He really did say He was a jealous God, and He is your ruler, and He gave you freedom. The one that creates is the one that has the right to control. So all these men telling you to do what God said don't do, and vice versa, it's your Obamacare. If you do that, you're a fool. Now, you have a choice to do it. Go ahead. It's like vaccinating your children with poison. Fine. 1 in 50 autistic, that's brain damage, straight up. So it comes down to how much do you want to live and live well. And to the extent you want to do that, you will wed yourself to truth. There's people, all kind of people. You can get a passport. It's just a different passport. It's an American national, a non-citizen national passport.
Now, I want to chime in here and say that what you've written here, it's very important to understand that the Bible is also a choice. It is a presentation of a choice. You're choosing, in your case, you're choosing the right path. Others will not. And what you've written here, and this is not meant to be blasphemous or anything like that. What you've written here really actually has nothing to do with your personal belief in God, whether God exists or does not exist. This is literally a legal tool for anyone, no matter what your religious belief is.
Yes. Absolutely. Right. And atheists should love this. You don't have to believe that there's God, but you do know that no man has a right to run you like a dog. Your rights are unalienable. No man can put a lien on your labor. That should be common sense to us, but we allow them to have our children. They lie to them for 13 years. They come out not understanding anything of the truth in any subject area. Whose fault is that if it's not our own fault?
Yeah,
so my solution is obey God. Keep your money in your pocket. What taxes you don't know you should not be paying. And keep your children in your home or put them in a position where they actually get a real education. If you don't do those things, that's okay. You're allowed to do it. But then you're going to pay for it. It's like these fools doing Obamacare. You're an absolute idiot. You're not even going to have your local... And I'm an ex-drug rep, and my dad was a heart surgeon. I worked in his office. I mean, I'm telling you, you cannot make a man work if he doesn't get paid. God said, if a man doesn't work, nor shall he eat. Now, I understand it's hard to watch people suffer, but you're really stealing from them the totality of the human being they would be if you didn't, welfare, rice and beans, all you want. Every day, all you want. You'd have sufficient protein to grow properly. Would you have extra money for beer and cigarettes and chips? No, you wouldn't. But you'd have a heck of a motivation to pay attention to what was going on as your government shipped your jobs overseas, as they robbed your pension funds, as criminals parade in front of you. We have a criminal, gun-running, drug-running attorney general, and nobody's doing anything about it. A treasonous, traitorous, treacherous president.
All right, Lauren, let me just say...
we can fix this, and that's all I didn't mean to get excited.
No, you're wonderful. I enjoyed that a lot, actually. I think you're beautiful, so don't worry about it. Hey, Gary, Lauren, and John, New York, I'm sorry I didn't get to you today, but I enjoyed that myself. Glad to know that there's people like you out there, Lauren, and same to you, my friend Gary. Any last parting words, Gary?
Oh, I just want to thank you for having me on again, and thanks to these wonderful callers, Lauren. She's all over it, and really great call. And look forward to more shows, Clint.
All right, my friend, thank you for joining me. And as to you, my audience, I'm happy to have you as callers, I'll tell you. Take care.